The first time I noticed something off about the old wooden mantel clock was on a rainy Thursday in early spring, the kind where the gutters clog with pollen and every corner of the house smells like wet earth and old habits. I'd been clearing out Greg's mother's estate boxes, like he asked, sorting china no one used, and framed pictures of people who hadn't called in years. When I tried shifting that dusty thing to wipe underneath it, and the entire back panel just fell open onto the floor with a thud that echoed louder than it should have in our quiet living room. I bent to pick it up, but before I could even touch the wooden cover, I saw them, slipped behind the clock's mechanism, like they'd been folded and hidden there deliberately. A crinkled envelope yellowed by time, a worn property deed from the 90s, and a Polaroid photo of me, taken from behind, standing alone on the dock of my mother-in-law's old lake house. The one Greg always said was never part of the will and didn't matter anyway because his family handled it before the lawyers were even called. But there I was, unmistakably me, holding that ridiculous red mug I always used back then, the one Greg claimed he'd accidentally dropped when we moved into his designer-built townhome. Before I tell you the rest, can you do me a quick favor and comment what state or country you're watching this from? We get listeners from all over, and it always helps us feel a little more connected, knowing where you're tuning in from. And hey, if this is your first time hearing one of our stories, welcome. I'm Joanna Pierce, and you've just stepped into the quiet unraveling of what I thought was a solid marriage, a safe life, and a home I helped build from scratch. Please don't forget to subscribe. We share stories like this every week. Stories that remind you how strong people can become when their backs are against the wall. Anyway, let me back up. I wasn't always a woman who snooped through old clocks or questioned deeds and wills. I was the kind of person who believed in the benefit of the doubt, in keeping the peace, in letting your husband take care of the legal stuff. Because he's the one with the architectural license and the shiny office and the Rotary Club contacts. Greg always knew how to put on a good show. Our house was the kind people took photos of during Christmas. Our relationship, the one neighbors brought up at cookouts. You two are solid, like the last of the good ones. But what no one saw was how often I shrank inside that beautiful house. How often my ideas about repainting or selling my mom's car were brushed off with a smile and a phrase like, "Leave the decisions to me, Joe." It wasn't cruel. It was subtle, almost polite. That's what made it harder to notice. And by the time I did, I'd already been married to Greg for 12 years, already convinced that being quietly sidelined was just how marriages aged. The lake house? I thought it had been sold, or maybe transferred to Greg's brother Kyle, who always had a fondness for fishing trips and an appetite for family heirlooms. I never asked much, mostly because Greg said his mom's estate was a mess and not worth dragging lawyers into. But standing there, holding that photo and the envelope in my hand, something inside me shifted, like a floorboard, creaking under a weight you didn't know was there. The deed was real. The date was months before she passed. The envelope had my name on it. And yet, I had never seen any of this. I kept hearing Greg's voice in my head. There was nothing left, Joe. Just let it go. But now I wasn't sure what I was letting go of, or how long he'd known I never had anything to begin with. That day started with me wiping dust off an old heirloom for donation. By the end of it, I had questions that didn't just change how I saw Greg. they changed how I saw myself and what came next. I never could have imagined. I didn't open the envelope right away. I just sat on the living room rug for what must have been an hour, the old clock ticking beside me like it had been keeping time on a secret no one meant for me to find. When I finally tore it open, the first thing I noticed was the handwriting. Margot's, Greg's mother. She had that careful, schoolteacher penmanship, even in her final months when the arthritis got bad. To Joanna Pierce, it said on the front, for when I'm gone, and no one else tells you the truth. My chest tightened as I read. She started by apologizing for the coldness, for the passive-aggressive remarks over the years, for the way she let Greg and Kyle take over everything while she slipped away slowly from the world. Then came the part that knocked the breath out of me. She said she'd left the lake house to me in her private will, the one her sons never filed. She wrote that I'd been the only one who visited her in the hospital those last 6 weeks, who brought her chamomile tea and rubbed lotion into her hands when the skin cracked, who sat with her when she cried about the life she didn't get to live. I wanted you to have a place that was truly yours, she wrote, a place where no one would talk over you. And then she added, Greg and Kyle insisted it was too complicated. They promised to handle the paperwork. I realize now they never meant for you to know. I didn't know whether to scream or sob or throw the clock through the window. I did none of those things. I just sat there, my fingers numb, until it got dark and Greg came home whistling, like the day hadn't just imploded inside my chest. We were supposed to have dinner that night with his firm partners, an outdoor fundraiser for some civic project. I almost didn't go, but something told me to put on the black dress he liked, brush my hair, and go anyway. Not because I wanted to keep up appearances, because I needed to see him lie to my face with my own eyes. We got to the event just as the sun was setting over the vineyard backdrop they'd rented. String lights glowed over white-clothed tables, and Greg, ever the star of the show, kissed hands and made people laugh like he always did. I stood by the cheese board and watched him. I thought about the way his voice lowered when I asked questions in public, the way he always gave me that tight-lipped smile before clarifying my stories. Halfway through dinner, I brought up the lake house casually, just between bites of salmon. You remember Margot's old place, I said, stabbing at the steamed carrots I didn't want. The lake house? On Bramble Point? Greg barely looked up. Yeah, what about it? I found a deed with my name on it, I said lightly, in one of her old estate boxes, with a letter. She said she left it to me. Greg's fork paused for half a second, but then he chuckled, low, dismissive. Babe, he said, loud enough for the people next to us to hear. You know how sick she was at the end. She wrote a lot of confused things. The woman next to me gave me a sympathetic look. Someone across the table chuckled. Besides, he added, the lake house was sold. Years ago. Kyle handled it, remember? You've just forgotten. I hadn't. That was the problem. And I saw it then, how easily he could spin truth into fiction with one confident smirk. How he'd already planted the seed in the others' minds. Poor Joanna must be mistaken. Her memory isn't what it used to be. I felt my face flush, my stomach twist into a knot, so tight I could barely swallow. I excused myself from the table, but not before I caught a glimpse of Kyle smirking into his wine glass like this was some inside joke, like I wasn't even a person, just a pawn they were moving out of their way. I drove home alone that night, Greg said he'd stay and network, which I knew meant schmoozing with a certain real estate rep who always wore lipstick a shade too dark and never used my name. I sat on our back porch with Margot's letter in my lap, rereading it under the porch light. "You're stronger than you think," she'd written. "You always have been. You just forgot because everyone around you keeps trying to make you small." I didn't sleep. I barely moved. I watched the sunrise like I was waiting for something to crack open in the sky and make sense of it all. I thought about how many times I'd deferred, how often I'd let Greg take care of it, how I'd let myself believe I wasn't the kind of person who knew about deeds or lawyers or signatures. But now, I wanted to know. Now, I needed to know. Not just for the lake house, for me. For every quiet moment I'd swallowed instead of asking. For every instinct I'd ignored just to keep peace in a home built on control, disguised as charm. Because if Greg could steal a house and convince the world I was imagining it, what else had I let him take without even realizing? By noon the next day, I was parked outside the county records office in my old Honda, gripping a yellow folder that held Margot's letter, the deed, and the Polaroid. I hadn't told Greg I was going. I just said I was taking a drive to clear my head. And judging by his distracted from behind his laptop, he wasn't listening anyway. The county building smelled like disinfectant and paper from 3 decades ago. A tired-looking woman at the front desk barely glanced up when I asked about property transfers for Bramble Point. "Owner name?" she muttered. I said, "Margot Langford," then quickly added, "But I think it was supposed to transfer to Joanna Pierce." She stopped typing, raised one eyebrow, and said, "Well, let's see what the system says." 20 minutes later, I was sitting at a narrow desk with a printout in my hands and a pit in my stomach. The property had been transferred to Kyle Langford 11 months before Margot died. The signature labeled Joanna Pierce was printed on the transfer authorization, but it wasn't mine. Not even close. My chest burned. The date on the file was 3 days after Margot's stroke, the one that briefly left her unable to speak or write. And that told me everything I needed to know. Greg and Kyle hadn't just forgotten to tell me about the lake house. They had taken it, forged my name, and made it disappear like it never belonged to me in the first place. That night, I didn't go home. I drove straight to the other side of town, to a small cafe tucked between a closed-down florist and a laundromat, a place I hadn't visited in years but always thought about when I passed by. It was called Brew and Bind, and the woman who owned it used to be someone I trusted with everything, until Greg convinced me she was too intense and had an axe to grind. Her name was Maya Dell, and 10 years ago, she was a paralegal with the sharpest brain and softest heart I'd ever known. We met during a volunteer legal clinic back when I worked part-time organizing books for the community center. She used to come over for soup nights, leave with borrowed novels, and tell me things like, "You're smarter than you act, Joe. Stop shrinking." But when Greg started freezing her out, canceling plans, calling her abrasive, rolling his eyes when I mentioned her, I let the friendship dissolve. I convinced myself she'd changed. But really, it was me who changed. To fit Greg's version of agreeable. I stepped into the cafe and there she was, exactly as I remembered, but maybe more grounded, wearing a denim apron, her hair streaked with gray, pouring lattes for a line of regulars who smiled like they knew her heartbeat. When she saw me, her eyes narrowed, but not with anger, just surprise. "Joe," she said slowly, wiping her hands on a rag. "Well, damn! Look what the dog dragged in." I almost cried. Instead, I said, "Do you have 5 minutes?" Maya looked me up and down, saw whatever was written on my face, and said, "For you? I've got 10. We sat in the back room, tucked between crates of coffee beans and a bookshelf labeled, "Leave one, take one." I handed her the documents, told her everything about the deed, the forged signature, the timing. I even showed her Margot's letter. Maya didn't interrupt. She just read slowly, then looked up and said, "This was premeditated. If the will wasn't filed and you were named, they committed fraud, real estate fraud, and forged documents? That's a felony, Joe. You could press charges." The word charges hit me like a fire alarm in a quiet room. I'd never even pressed a parking dispute, but suddenly I could feel something shifting inside me. Not rage exactly, but something quieter and more dangerous. Clarity. "Would anyone believe me?" I asked. "Greg's the golden boy of Halston County. Kyle's on the zoning board. They've built up a whole identity." Maya didn't blink. "They built it on your silence. That's the one thing they don't control anymore." Then she reached into a file drawer, pulled out an old leather-bound notepad, and said, "Let's build a timeline. Every conversation, every date, every little detail that didn't sit right. We'll find the threads. You just have to be honest with yourself." Over the next few days, I started keeping secrets. Not to lie, but to survive. I bought a second phone. I signed up for a free cloud storage service and scanned every document I could find. I called the law office that had handled Margot's estate and pretended I was asking about estate planning for a friend, just to get a sense of who handled the files. Meanwhile, at home, I smiled. I made dinner. I nodded when Greg told me he might be out of town for a guys' retreat with Kyle. I played the part, but every night when he went to bed and I stayed up with a book, I was building a case. The hardest part wasn't the research. It was remembering all the times I'd let myself believe I was overreacting. Like when Greg took a phone call and stepped outside anytime I mentioned finances. Or when he'd moved the filing cabinet to his home office and locked it with the excuse that things needed to be secure. Or when Kyle once joked at a family barbecue, "Joe doesn't ask too many questions. It's what we love about her." And I had laughed like it was flattery, not a warning. But now, I heard it all differently. Every joke, every deflection, every delayed answer. It wasn't forgetfulness, it was orchestration. One night, about a week into my quiet investigation, Greg walked into the kitchen while I was rereading Margot's letter. I panicked and shoved it under a cookbook. He didn't notice. He was on his phone, muttering something about rezoning permits and needing to move some accounts around. Then he said, with his back turned to me, "Hey, did you ever go through those boxes from Mom's place?" I froze. "Some of them," I said evenly. "Why?" He shrugged. "No reason. Just wondering if there was anything worth keeping. You know, before we donate." I smiled. "Nothing important." And I meant it, because what I had now wasn't in a box. It was in my hands. It was knowledge, power, truth. And I wasn't going to let it slip through my fingers again. It didn't take long before Greg sensed the shift in me. Not because I said anything, but because I stopped saying everything. I used to greet him at the door with a kiss, ask about his day, nod along while he monologued about zoning disputes or how Kyle had saved the project again. I didn't do that anymore. I stopped asking. I stopped nodding. And I started watching. And Greg, for all his arrogance, wasn't stupid. He noticed. At first, it came in small ways. Him lingering longer in my office, asking if I was okay a little too often, peeking at my computer screen when I was just updating our budget. Then one morning, I woke up to find that the joint checking account was suddenly inaccessible, frozen. I logged into our bank app and was greeted with a bland message. Account temporarily restricted. Please contact your branch manager. No notice, no call, no explanation. I texted Greg. Hey, do you know what's going on with the bank? His reply came 3 minutes later. Some weird activity flagged. I took precaution. We'll talk tonight. That night, he smiled across the dinner table like nothing was wrong and said, I moved a few things around just until we get everything sorted with the estate. I stared at him. What estate? His smile faltered, just for a second, then returned. Oh, I mean, I'm handling some old tax stuff from Margot's accounts. Kyle needed access to some records, and it got messy. Don't worry about it. I told myself not to react. Not yet. The next day, I came home from the cafe where I'd been meeting with Maya to find 2 uniformed men standing in our foyer with Greg, holding a clipboard. Just checking on the home security, Greg said casually, handing me a printout of recommended upgrades. Cameras for the front and back entrances, window sensors, an additional code panel in the upstairs hallway. I blinked at him. Why now? I asked. Nothing's happened. It's precaution, he said again, like that was supposed to be comforting. Crime's been up lately. Besides, don't you want to feel safer? I wanted to scream. Instead, I walked upstairs, locked the door, and texted Maya. I think he's setting up surveillance on me. She called 5 minutes later. You need to get a burner phone, she said. Now. And we need to talk in person only from this point on. I could hear the urgency in her voice. He's escalating, Joe. This is how it starts. Financial isolation, monitoring, paranoia. He knows you're pulling away. He just doesn't know why yet. And that makes you dangerous. That word echoed in my head. Dangerous. I didn't feel dangerous. I felt cornered. I felt like someone had drawn a circle around my life and started shrinking it from all sides. The next hit came 3 days later at the bookstore. I had been helping Mrs. Redman, the retired teacher who came in every week to ask if I had any new mystery novels without too much swearing. When I overheard 2 women at the register whispering, "Did you hear?" One of them murmured, "Joanna's been having a rough time. I heard from Kara that Greg's really worried about her mental health." "Poor thing," the other woman said. "She always seems so sweet. But you never know what's really going on behind closed doors." I stood frozen in the middle of the new releases section, a paperback dangling from my hand. I had to sit down. My face flushed so hot it burned. Greg wasn't just locking down our finances or watching me. He was preparing the narrative. He was laying the groundwork, subtle hints, small-town gossip, whispered concern. And it was working. That night, I confronted him. Not about the deed, not yet. About the bank account, about the new locks, about the whispers I'd heard at the bookstore. Are you telling people I'm unstable? I asked, standing in the kitchen with my arms crossed, my voice low and steady. Greg didn't even flinch. Joe, he said gently, walking toward me like I was a cornered animal. You've been off lately, distant, secretive. I'm not telling anyone anything that isn't obvious. I just said I was concerned. People notice things. You've always cared what they think. So you're making sure they think I'm losing it? I asked. Is that the plan? His face twisted, just slightly. You're being dramatic, he said. See, this is what I meant. You're paranoid lately. You should talk to someone. I'm talking to you, I snapped. And you're gaslighting me. He exhaled sharply and walked out of the room, but not before muttering, You don't want to make this ugly, Joe. I stood alone in that kitchen for a long time, staring at the door he'd disappeared behind, hearing his words echo. You don't want to make this ugly. It was already ugly. It had been ugly for years. I just hadn't let myself look at it in daylight. The next morning, Maya met me at a diner outside of town. She slid me a folder across the table. I pulled everything I could on the original will, she said. Turns out there was a draft. Margot's lawyer retired shortly after she died. I called in a favor and got him to check his backups. He didn't have the final copy, but he did have a voicemail. I blinked. What kind of voicemail? From Margot, she said, 2 weeks before she died. She left it on his office line, confirming she wanted to name you as sole heir to the Bramble Point property. I've got the audio. We can timestamp it. It won't solve everything, but it's hard to ignore. I pressed my hands against my face, holding back the wave of emotion threatening to spill over. I can't believe she tried to protect me, even when I didn't see it. Maya placed a hand over mine. You don't need to believe in everything yet. Just believe in this. Greg's afraid. That's why he's tightening his grip. He knows you're not scared of him anymore. And when a man like that loses control, he panics. But we're not going to panic. We're going to be smart, precise. And when we move, we'll be unstoppable. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not because things were better, but because, for the first time, I wasn't alone. And that meant Greg Langford's game was almost over. He just didn't know it yet. I don't remember breathing much the day of the gala. It was Greg's firm's 20th anniversary celebration. Black tie, vineyard venue, catered by some trendy fusion outfit from the city. All week, he'd floated through the house like he was hosting the Oscars, telling me which board members would be there, who I should talk to, and reminding me, just try not to say anything weird tonight, all right? These people are important. I smiled and nodded, like I always used to. But inside, I was holding a secret, with sharper edges than any wine glass they'd be clinking that evening. Maya and I had chosen this night for a reason. It was the perfect storm. The venue had media coverage, the guest list included local council members and zoning officials, and Greg, always so concerned with perception, would be completely unprepared. What he thought was going to be his shining moment was about to become the stage for his downfall, and I was done playing the quiet wife in the corner. I wore a deep navy dress Margot had once complimented. Makes you look like you own the room. And brought a slim clutch that, instead of a phone and lipstick, held a flash drive and a letter. Maya was already at the venue, posing as a caterer's assistant, her friend Colin manning the AV booth. He'd agreed to run the presentation we'd prepared. Everything was timed. every detail rehearsed. All I had to do was wait for Greg to start his speech. We arrived just after sunset, the sky streaked purple and gold, the kind of backdrop photographers love. Greg walked in like royalty, shaking hands, nodding toward familiar faces, and pulling me close for photo ops, whispering, "Smile like you mean it, Joe," through clenched teeth. The irony made my stomach ache. I smiled. Oh, I smiled. The evening unfolded like clockwork. Wine flowed, speeches rolled out, and Greg finally took the stage beneath a canopy of fairy lights and a brass plaque with his name engraved. He cleared his throat, thanked his team, made a joke about building dreams, one property line at a time, and began a story about how hard he worked to protect family legacies. That was my cue. I slipped to the side of the stage where Colin was already prepping the projection screen behind him. Maya gave me the tiniest nod from across the crowd, and then, click. At first, no one understood what they were looking at. The projector lit up with a scanned image of Margot's handwritten letter addressed to me. Then the screen shifted to the property deed listing me as the recipient. Then the forged transfer to Kyle. Then, most damning, a time-stamped audio recording. "Hi, Tom, it's Margot Langford," her voice croaked from the speaker system. You could hear the struggle in her breath, the hospital beeping faintly in the background. "I wanted to confirm. I've decided the Bramble Point property should go to Joanna. She's family. She took care of me. Greg and Kyle. Well, they've got enough. I know this might stir things up, but I need you to file the paperwork before the boys get involved." Gasps. One woman covered her mouth. A man 3 tables away turned sharply to look at Greg. His face lost all its color. He stepped toward me, voice rising. "What the hell are you doing?" I looked at him without flinching. "Telling the truth." The screen continued, now showing text messages between Greg and Kyle, captured from a cloud sync I'd managed to restore on Greg's old iPad. Messages that read, "Just file it, she won't even notice," and "Joe's clueless, always has been. Get her to sign something else and she'll drop it." People were murmuring now. Someone whispered, "Is this real?" Another asked, "Wait, is that the lake house they remodeled last year?" Greg grabbed the mic, tried to laugh. "Folks, sorry. My wife's she's going through something. This is all out of context." I stepped up beside him, took the mic from his hand, and said into it, clear and calm. "What's out of context, Greg? That your mother left me the house? That you forged my signature? That you froze our accounts and started telling people I was mentally unstable? Or that you've been running your business like a cover for quietly rewriting women out of their own lives?" The silence was deafening. Even the servers stopped pouring wine. Greg's jaw tensed. Kyle was already sneaking toward the exit, but Maya intercepted him, holding up a folder thick with more copies of messages, bank transfers, and Margot's handwritten letters. "These will go to the press tomorrow," she said, just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Unless you'd like to explain them now." The rest of the night unraveled like a slow-motion train wreck. Greg stormed off the stage. Guests whispered and took photos of the screen with their phones. One councilwoman left early, saying something about needing to call the ethics board. A younger associate at Greg's firm leaned over to a colleague and whispered, "I wondered why she never came to the office. Now I get it." I stood in the center of it all, sweating, shaking, but upright. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing behind Greg's shadow. I was the story now, not the victim. The voice. Later, in the parking lot, Greg tried one last time. "You just blew up my entire career, Joe. What do you think you've won?" He snapped, yanking off his tie like it was choking him. I stepped closer and said, "I didn't do this to win. I did it so I wouldn't lose myself any further. And well, you did this to yourself." He got in his car and peeled off, leaving behind skid marks and trail of collapsed illusions. I turned to Maya, who was watching from a distance. "You think it'll stick?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "You just threw a boulder into still water. You watch how far those ripples go." That night, I didn't cry. I didn't even sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, listening to the echo of Margot's voice in that recording. Not the guilt-ridden woman she became at the end, but the one who'd tried, in her own broken way, to leave something good behind. She believed in me, even when I didn't. And now, I believed in me too. The truth was out. The house wasn't the only thing Greg had stolen, but it was the first thing I was taking back. And soon, it wouldn't be the last. The fallout started the next morning. By the time I finished my first cup of coffee, Greg's name was already trending on the local Facebook groups. Someone had filmed the whole gala scene: Margot's voicemail, my confrontation, Greg's red-faced meltdown, and posted it with the caption, "Joanna Pierce, Halston's silent storm." I wouldn't have known if not for Maya, who texted me a link with a winking emoji and the words, "You broke the internet. Congrats." My phone buzzed constantly that day. Friends I hadn't heard from in years, a neighbor apologizing for ever believing Greg's stories, even the city librarian asking if I'd consider speaking at an upcoming women's history panel. I didn't respond to most of them. I wasn't ready to be anyone's cautionary tale or local celebrity. All I wanted was space to think, to breathe, to figure out what it meant to finally own my voice again after keeping it buried for so long. Greg, predictably, went into full damage control mode. He called 3 times the day after the gala. I didn't answer, left voicemails ranging from furious to desperate. "We can fix this, Joe. I know you're upset, but do you really want to destroy everything?" I saved the recordings, then blocked his number. His firm released a limp public statement 2 days later. "We are currently reviewing recent allegations and remain committed to transparency." Maya rolled her eyes when she read it aloud. Translation: "We're panicking, but hoping this all goes away." But it didn't. The city zoning board opened an inquiry into past deals Greg and Kyle had overseen. Turns out, Bramble Point wasn't the only property their names had quietly crept into. 3 other families came forward, 2 elderly women and a widower, all claiming they'd been pushed out or misled into transferring ownership during estate transitions involving Greg's legal counsel. That's when things shifted from community gossip to legal action. Maya, who'd once sworn she'd never go back into legal work full-time, dusted off her credentials and became my official advocate. We filed a civil fraud case against Greg and Kyle for falsifying Margot's will and forging my signature. The original lawyer who drafted Margot's documents, Tom Abernathy, came out of retirement just to provide an affidavit and testimony. He remembered Margot's call clearly. "She trusted Joanna," he said in a statement. "And she told me, plain as day, she didn't trust her sons." By the end of the month, a judge placed a temporary freeze on all Bramble Point assets and issued subpoenas for Greg and Kyle's financial records. Kyle panicked first. he tried to quietly offer me a settlement. "Just to make this go away," he said through clenched teeth when we ran into each other outside the courthouse. I told him no, not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted accountability, because they'd built their lives on quiet theft and called it leadership, because I wasn't going to let them sweep this under the rug while the rest of us kept scrubbing the floors beneath them. Greg, on the other hand, tried a different tactic. He showed up at the bookstore, unannounced, 2 weeks after the gala, wearing that same apologetic smile I used to fall for. "Joe," he said, lingering near the biography shelf, "you don't have to burn everything down. We were good once, weren't we?" I looked up from the counter. "We were convenient once. There's a difference." He stared at me like he didn't recognize the woman behind the register. And maybe he didn't. Because I wasn't the same woman anymore. I didn't just know who I was. I knew what I was worth. When the ruling came through in court, it felt surreal. The judge ruled in my favor. The Bramble Point property deed was reinstated to my name. The forged signature deemed fraudulent. A criminal investigation into financial elder abuse was opened against both Greg and Kyle. The court even awarded me restitution for legal fees and damages. I was standing on the steps of the courthouse, the wind picking up around my coat, when Maya turned to me and said, "Well, you just set a precedent." I smiled, but it wasn't about winning anymore. It was about recovering the parts of myself I hadn't even realized were stolen. Choice, dignity, voice. I moved into the lake house 2 weeks later. It needed work. The roof had some leaks, the back deck was rotting, and the dock hadn't seen a boat in years. But it was mine. Every plank of wood, every crooked floorboard, every shadowed corner that caught the sunset just right. I used my savings, not Greg's, not joint accounts, just mine, to restore it. Repainted the front door, planted roses along the path, turned the guest room into a reading nook. Some mornings, I'd wake up early, make a pot of coffee, and sit on the porch swing with Margot's letter in my lap, whispering, "Thank you," to the wind. People in town started seeing me differently. Not with pity, but with a kind of quiet respect. A woman from the grocery store stopped me and said, "You gave us all a little hope." One of the elderly women who'd come forward in the zoning fraud case sent me a letter. "Thank you for being brave when I wasn't." I didn't feel brave most days. I felt tired, but also free. No more whispering, no more walking on eggshells, no more asking permission to exist. And Greg? He resigned from his firm under pressure. Kyle stepped down from the zoning board. Their reputations cracked, their carefully polished images dulled under the weight of truth. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just kept going. Because the real reward wasn't their downfall. It was my restoration. I started writing again. Essays, mostly. Personal reflections. Stories about women who thought they'd lost everything, only to find out they hadn't even begun to live yet. Maya encouraged me to publish. I wasn't sure, but part of me wanted to. Part of me wanted other women to know they weren't crazy. They weren't alone. That sometimes the truth doesn't set you free right away, but it does open the door. And once you walk through that door, you don't ever go back. It's been exactly 1 year since I stood in front of Greg's colleagues under that string of fairy lights and told the truth. 1 year since I reclaimed my name, my voice, and the deed to the house everyone said wasn't mine. I mark the anniversary not with champagne or speeches, But with something quieter, I repaint the porch swing Margot used to sit on. Pale robin's egg blue, just like she liked it. It creaks the same way it always has. But it feels different now, like a heartbeat instead of an echo. The lake house isn't just a house anymore. It's become a place for others, too. After the ruling, I converted the guest room into a retreat space for women who need a few days to breathe. No agenda, no forms, just quiet, coffee, and shelves full of used books. Word got around. Women started calling, not just those wronged by Greg's zoning deals, but teachers, nurses, retired women with stories they'd never told out loud. They come, sit on the dock, and slowly start remembering who they were before the world told them they were too much or not enough. Angelina, a retired school counselor in her 60s, came last fall. She brought a shoebox of letters her husband had hidden from her. Apologies from a daughter she hadn't seen in 7 years. He said they'd never arrived, she whispered, staring at the water. He said she didn't want me. I didn't say much, just brewed her peppermint tea and showed her how the morning mist hangs low on the lake until the sun insists it move. Sometimes healing doesn't need a therapist's couch. Sometimes it needs stillness and someone who listens without trying to fix you. That's what this place became, a space where no one rearranges the truth to suit themselves. A space where women unlearn the need to apologize for simply existing. Maya visits often. She laughs now more than she did before. She tells people, half joking, that Joanna's revenge made me believe in the legal system again. We sit on the back deck and talk about turning the cabin behind the boathouse into a small writing studio. Maybe I'll finally write that book she keeps nudging me to do. Maybe not. But the idea that I'm allowed to take up space like that, is a victory, all its own. Greg, last I heard, moved to Charleston. His real estate license is under review, and the fraud investigation is ongoing. Kyle declared bankruptcy after civil penalties stripped most of his holdings. I get occasional updates through town chatter, but I don't seek them. I don't need to. Whatever happens to them now is out of my hands, and that's where it belongs. Justice doesn't always look like handcuffs. Sometimes it looks like silence where there used to be control. Sometimes it's simply the absence of fear. A life no longer built around what someone else might say or do. The power to make your coffee strong, your decisions stronger, and not feel like you need permission for either. One afternoon in spring, I visited Margot's grave. I hadn't been since the settlement, not out of avoidance, but because I wasn't ready until I had something more to say than I found the papers. I brought a small bouquet of daffodils from the edge of the lake. Bright, stubborn little things that bloom even when the soil's still cold. I placed them on her stone and sat cross-legged in the grass. "You were right," I whispered. About the house, about them, but also about me. I pulled the letter she wrote, the one I had once read with shaking hands on a hardwood floor, and reread the last lines aloud. "I hope this gives you something of your own. I hope you plant roots where no one can dig them up again." And I had, not just in soil, in myself. Later that night, after the house had gone still and the lake reflected the moon like a memory, I sat by the window and wrote something in the back of an old library book I kept meaning to donate. To the woman who finds this, if someone ever convinces you that your version of the story isn't worth telling, tell it anyway. And don't wait for the world to give you a microphone. Take it. Speak, even if your voice shakes. I slipped the book onto the free library stand outside the general store in town. It was gone the next day. I've learned that healing doesn't arrive like a sunrise. It's more like a long season change, messy, unpredictable, full of backslides and strange warmths in cold months. There are still mornings I wake up and wait for Greg's voice to echo from the hallway. Still dreams where I'm frozen at a dinner party, unable to speak while people laugh and decide what version of me to believe. But those mornings pass. And when they do, I sit on the dock with my coffee and look at the still water, remembering that I'm not the woman in that dream anymore. I'm not asking to be believed. I'm simply living the truth. Out loud. If someone had told me 2 years ago that I'd reclaim a house, take down a small-town power player, and quietly rebuild my life as something stronger, softer, freer, I would have smiled politely and gone back to washing dishes. But the truth is, strength wasn't something I discovered. It was something I remembered. It had always been there, like the deed tucked inside that old mantel clock, waiting for me to finally stop cleaning around it and open the damn thing. Now, on quiet evenings when I sit by the fire, wrapped in the quilt Margot left behind, I think about how many women are out there right now, whispering their instincts into pillows, swallowing doubt because someone convinced them doubt equals disloyalty. To those women, I say this: you are not paranoid. You are not dramatic. You are not wrong to ask questions. You are not hard to love. You are simply unpracticed in a world that rewards your silence. Break things, if you must. A clock, a rule, a silence. Because sometimes, breaking is the only way we make room for what's real. And when you finally find yourself standing in that room you thought you'd never belong in, don't shrink. Don't apologize. Just walk in like you built it. Because maybe, just maybe, you did.